Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual equivalent of Boulder Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us, those of you who are live and those of you who are watching the recording of this event later. We really appreciate your time and your eyeballs. This is Fake News, the election edition. And my name is Turja Becker. I am a reference and collection development librarian at Boulder Public. I work in the main library. And the genesis of this event, I'm sure we're all aware of. We are now 1 month out from the 2020 election, which includes a presidential election. And I think it's safe to say the one thing everyone can agree on is that sorting through the hype and the emotion and the spin to get solid information about the candidates and the issues and their positions on the issues is crucial, not only to thoughtful voting, but also to the future of our democracy. Long-term, learning how to distinguish real from fake news, and we'll talk about that term fake news a bit later as well, can make us better citizens on all fronts, whether you're talking about COVID, racial tension, the election, as we'll be talking about today, or future topics that we don't even know we're going to be talking about in a year or so. And this is true no matter where you stand politically. So I think everybody on either side of the aisle will benefit from this discussion. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to address some housekeeping issues. This event is being recorded, as I said earlier, and it will be available indefinitely on the library's YouTube channel after today. All of our online events are an extension of library services. And so our library conduct policies, which you can read on our website at boulderlibrary.org, do apply in this virtual space. Next, if you enjoy this presentation, we've got more great events on the horizon. Please visit our website, same address, boulderlibrary.org, for our full virtual events calendar, including our One Book, One Boulder events. That program is going on right now, and there's a lot of great stuff associated with it, especially for those of you who enjoy discussing the issues of the day, as we will today. And finally, I would like to thank our friends at the Boulder Library Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this and so many of our events. We couldn't do it without you guys. At any time during this event, you can ask questions of our panelists by posting them to the comments on Facebook or the chat on YouTube. We'll work to address your questions later in the presentation during the audience Q&A section, but you can post them at any time. My colleague, Catherine Bertone, will be moderating the chat and sharing your questions at that time. Thank you for being here and helping out today, Catherine. And I'd also like to thank Adam Watts, who you can't see, but Adam is a library creative technologist working behind the scenes to make sure our stream is smooth. So thank you to Adam. Now, for the main event, I would like to introduce our panelists. They are all affiliated with the University of Colorado Boulder in some way. First up, we have Kent Willman, an instructor at CU's School of Education. Kent taught high school social studies in Longmont for 32 years, and he has spoken numerous times about fake news and its history at both our library and the Longmont Public Library. And after we hear from Kent, we'll be hearing from Emily Adams. Emily is a senior communications specialist at CU and a master's student in its media and public engagement program. She's currently working with a group of CU researchers who are looking more closely at how today's media technologies affect democracy. And Emily, like Kent, was with us for the prior presentation we did back in June. And finally, we'll be hearing from Sandra Fish. Sandra is a data journalist specializing in politics, and she is a 2020 draft fellow working on disinformation. She also writes about campaign finance for the Colorado Sun with funding from the Colorado Media Project, and her work has appeared on Colorado Public Radio, among other numerous outlets. She currently teaches data journalism at CU, and she spearheaded an event at Longmont Public Library to talk about information in the election last week. We are so lucky to have Kent, Emily, and Sandra with us today, and it's my great pleasure now to turn it over to Kent. Take it away, Kent.
Thanks, Turja. As Turja said, I work with teachers at the University of Colorado, and I'm not a journalism major, and don't work with political science. I did have some background in journalism. I was a paper boy for quite some time. Well, let's start off with some political cartoons, some cartoons here. Let me read this to you. Did you see the shocking claims in the video I emailed you? Yes. The video is so obviously fake that only a raging moron would think that any of it's true. I think it's all true. Well, that's one data point in my favor. It's kind of a conversation you have with your family and friends. Here's the real problem: the disinformation coming out of the Soviet Union, an attempt to boil down Western society. How do you know if a news story is true? If I agree with it, confirmation bias is a huge issue in our lives today. The stuff about fake news is not new stuff. It's been around for quite some time. As Turgis said, I taught for 30 years, so I have things still on overheads. Remember overhead projectors?
Oh, yeah.
This is a copy of an overhead. CNN special report, lies. Bill Clinton, lies. Barnacle resigns, all lies. Why do you pay attention to that stuff? I want to be informed. Mark Twain has some comments for us. If you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you do read the newspaper, you are misinformed. I'm always on top of stuff like that. Then Napoleon. 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Look at the power of media in our lives. Man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. You'll be singing that song for the rest of the day in your head. Painting is not done to decorate apartments. It is an instrument of war. From Picasso. Political cartoons do that literally, from Steve Benson. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Attributed to Voltaire. When you have a good debate, you have a good debate in your house. You invite Thomas Jefferson in and let him talk for a while. He'll provide information on both sides of arguments. We're left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government. We should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. There's a great trust in people's public information. Then he goes on to say, a man who reads nothing at all is better educated than a man who reads nothing but newspapers. Jefferson can argue with himself all day long. Teddy Roosevelt, newspapers at the time of Teddy Roosevelt. Here you see friendly newspapers, and you see unfriendly newspapers. Fill in the blank. What's the type of media here? One faction, spearheaded primarily by educators, believed that blank could be a tool for enriching people's lives. They wanted a government-funded national blank program that would be largely informational and educational. Another faction believed blank would be used for trivial purposes and become a waste of time. The now famous quote, "A blank pioneer responded to blank's commercialization by asking, 'What have you done with my child?' You send him off into the streets in rags of ragtime, collect money from all and sundry. You have made of him a laughingstock of intelligence, surely a stench in the nostrils of the ionosphere." I give it away. They're talking about radio there. And that could apply to television, internet, all sorts of stuff. The St. Paul Globe, their motto from 1895. The Globe's motto: live news, latest news, reliable news, no fake war news. Some altered photos. Here's Lincoln's head on a body of John Calhoun. Took out Churchill's cigar because smoking became unhealthy. People have been disappearing in the Soviet Union in all kinds of ways. Here, this guy disappeared from a photograph. The Russians have been behind disinformation for a long, long time. Next one's my favorite piece of fake news of all time. I think it's just such a classic fake news story. Yes, I remember reading that to my daughter. It was really a great moment of time in life. I almost fell for this fake news.
Can't I still believe that fake news?
Isn't it good? It's so good. Yeah, we can talk about truth if you like for a while. So here, let's look at the tweet. Donald Trump. Obama should wait until he leaves office to pick another justice. Doesn't he should be fired. Made from 2016. And check it out. It was a fake tweet. Remember when I saw that one on Facebook, I believed it. It was my confirmation bias that helped me believe that. But do a little exploration online, check it out, and you can discover it's a fake one.
Wow.
People are getting better and better at reporting about misinformation about all sorts of topics, including the debate. There's all kinds of information about false ads and TikTok videos that made claims about Biden's health issues. Black Lives Matter movement, and George Floyd was not immune to the fake news as well. There was some reports that George Floyd's not really dead. George Soros is supplying bricks to protesters. All kinds of stuff of that nature. But the USA Today did a good job of providing background about how to find out whether it's fake news or not. People are on top of this in some ways. And I'll tell you, schools, teachers, and newspapers do a good job of this as well. We're going to work on preparing the next generation of systems to be well prepared for fake news. All kinds of good services for free services and some that are pay that people can use in their classrooms. And it's required by state standards. There was a law last legislative session that was proposed to require kids to learn about media literacy. The state social specialists had to go down to the state legislature and explain to the legislators 30 in the state standards 138 times. Group, they should have done some homework first. Stanford Education Group provides some really great stuff. Civic online reasoning assessments. Teach kids how to examine claims on Twitter, claims on social media, to do YouTube evaluation. Really worthwhile stuff. Teachers love it. Some quality free training coming up and available from the News Literacy Project, which is great stuff for people. If you want to get some information on a consistent basis about fake news, the News Literacy Project is great for teachers and for the public as well. Sign up for their newsletter. It's free. If you're a parent, Common Sense Media does exactly what it says. It provides a common sense approach to media and kids for all sorts of ages. It helps you figure out what you want to show your kids, what you don't want to show them at various age levels. It's amazingly, it does what it says. It's a Common Sense Media place. Of course, librarians have been doing this work for a long time.
Yay, librarians!
Yay.
Librarians, great folks. There's all kinds of places where you can do fact checking and things of that nature. There's all kinds of. Just ask your librarian how can I find out about fake news and how to avoid it. Provide all sorts of help for that. Let's be careful what we ask for, though. Raise our to teach our children to question the news and authority. It's not be surprised when they grow up to question the news and authority. That'll be why we have some science skeptics. All right, so here's some advice from Grandma. Everything I need to learn about media literacy, I learned from Grandma. Grandma says, do your homework. Check out your sources. If you don't know if sources are correct source or not, look them up. Open up a new browser window and Google the source. Be especially careful of strangers online. Good advice from Grandma. Ask yourself, what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to sell me? And why? Do your homework. Eat your vegetables. Get your news from a variety of sources, even those you disagree with. Welcome to new ideas. Eat your broccoli. Don't eat too many sweets. Be aware of confirmation bias. You're consuming the same news channels all the time. You probably got a warped view of the world. Be responsible. Media gives us what we ask for. Ask for the good stuff. Media is ratings driven. So the idea is to ask for the good stuff, and that way they'll be encouraged to provide us with better news. Be responsible in your sharing as well. Sharing is caring. So share carefully. Make sure you know what you're sharing with folks. Finally, say thank you. Both news organizations, reporters, and even social media sharers are committed to the civic good. We could not survive as a democracy without them. We need free media of all sorts to do our jobs as citizens. Finally, as we return to Jefferson again, We're the ones with the power. We use it to vote. No safe depository of the ultimate powers of society, people themselves. We think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion. Remedy is not to take it away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. We're the ones with the power here, folks, in a democracy. Let's use it, let's vote. Thank you very much. Turn it back over to Terja.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you for those cartoons too. It's good in this environment to get a bit of levity for sure.
It really helped.
All right, so it's now Emily's turn. Emily's gonna take the story from a different angle, but equally useful. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Terja. I don't have this in my presentation, but I just wanted to echo Ken's last slide there about voting. So important, and we all have to do it this time, no matter what.
Amen. Yep.
So I wanted to talk a little bit today about social media business models and how they affect the spread of disinformation. We hear a lot about, how kind of what people do personally on social media platforms affects things, but I think there's a lot behind social media platforms really driving a lot of what we see and experience there too. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today. First off, I want to acknowledge that social media is great for connecting with friends and family and learning new skills and finding communities that share your interests. It's also nearly ubiquitous at this point. 70% of adults were on Facebook as of 2019. YouTube is really close behind that, and it's actually first in popularity for younger adults. And more than 55% of adults now say that they get their news often or sometimes from social, and that's from Pew Research Center. But I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that as much as social media platforms, taglines, and marketing campaigns want us to believe that connection and learning and community are behind what they do, it's not really totally true. So if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation, it's this. Social media platforms don't have your best interests at heart. I don't say that to demonize the platforms or to make you quit tomorrow. I'm on a lot of them, and quitting isn't an option for many of us, either for social or professional reasons. So instead, I just advocate for using these platforms responsibly and avoiding some of their pitfalls. So what is the goal of the platforms? Many really did start with altruistic intentions. The founders of YouTube really did just want to create a place for people to upload and share videos. Mark Zuckerberg's, intentions are a little bit more questionable, but still, they were trying to create this space for connection. But eventually, they all had to come up with a way to turn a profit. I think most people know that advertising is a part of all of these platforms, but I would argue that the business model goes beyond just selling ads or ad space, TV and newspapers and magazines. So a lot of you have probably seen this quote making the rounds. If you're not paying for it, you're not the customer, you are the product being sold. And that sounds a little bit scary, but I think what it really means is these platforms are selling your attention and often your personal data, which is something to keep in mind, to pretty much anyone who wants it, from companies to political consulting firms like Cambridge Analytica. And in order to sell your attention, they need you to stay on the platform. They need you to stay on Facebook looking at things or stay on YouTube watching videos. And this is where algorithms come in. And we've all heard that term. It's obviously, they're very complex. I don't claim to be a computer scientist, so I don't understand them in much depth. But what I do know is that this is basically the math and the intelligence that's driving what you see on these platforms. So today I'm going to kind of walk through examples from 3 of the top platforms. And I relied on either reports from sources within the companies or researchers who are studying the platforms for these articles that I'm going to show. So first off is Facebook. Facebook has probably been in the public eye the most for privacy issues and concerns over the spread of disinformation. On Facebook, you are not seeing every post by every friend in chronological order. Your news feed is the result of these algorithms. And recently, and that's what this article in the Wall Street Journal showed, they convened an internal group to look at whether these algorithms were making our political discourse more divisive. They didn't disclose a whole lot publicly, but the group did have concerns about how the platform prioritizes user engagement. So that's likes and comments. Unfortunately, the group said that their final recommendations were largely shelved by the company leadership. So again, we go back to that disconnect between what might be best for users and what's best for the company. YouTube is really one of the most interesting cases that I looked at last year as I was taking a course on democracy and technology. Their recommender system, which recommends what video you should watch next, can be particularly problematic when it comes to serving up the content that it thinks you're interested in. People have found that recommending more extreme videos about any subject will keep you watching. One researcher noticed that it was happening with political content during the 2016 election. She was watching Trump rally videos for a report she was writing, and she was kind of startled when YouTube started recommending white supremacist rants and conspiracy theories. So she tried the experiment again with non-political things, and this was her quote: "Videos about vegetarianism led to videos about veganism. Videos about jogging led to videos about running ultra marathons." And so the essay on this slide is actually by a YouTube engineer, or a former YouTube engineer, who discussed how this tendency could lead people to believe that certain content, like flat earth theories, are actually more popular than they are. He and some colleagues built a tool to analyze what videos YouTube's algorithms recommended the most on some topics such as science and elections. And he said, "We noticed that in the 2016 election, the candidate that was the most aggressive against media was recommended 4 times more than his opponent." So that's something to keep in mind as you're, kind of watching things on YouTube, that they're playing a role in what you're seeing. They have taken some steps since then to label things like anti-vaccination videos, but currently there's about 300 hours of content being uploaded to YouTube every minute. So that's really hard for them to police, and they're relying a lot more on computing to do that work for them. So my caution there is just, some people refer to it as the rabbit hole on YouTube, that you can just sit there and keep watching things and keep watching the next up. But passive watching can really lead to some weird stuff that you might not want to see. My colleague and I did a presentation called "From Cat Videos to Hitler," because that's kind of the joke, that's how far it can go. So Twitter is the platform that makes the most data available to researchers. So there are a lot of studies out there about the dynamics on that platform, if you ever want to look around in Google Scholar. But I thought this one was interesting for the conversation today. They looked mainly at real users on the platform, not automated accounts, and found that there was a lot of misinformation being shared by real people. There are a lot of automated, they're called bot accounts, which is a big way that it's a big method that Russia used to interfere in the election in 2016 and are using again this year. Twitter used to function also as a chronological feed. So everyone that you followed, you saw every tweet. But a few years ago, they rolled out an algorithmic timeline too. So they say in their FAQs, when we identify a tweet, an account to follow, or other content that's popular or relevant, we may add it to your timeline. This means you will sometimes see tweets from accounts you don't follow. So, who's deciding what's popular and relevant, and how is that being decided? A big problem with algorithms that these platforms use is that they're what they call a black box. So we don't know why it's making those decisions. We just kind of see the results of it. So I didn't find a whole lot of research specifically about how that's affecting political dialogue, but there are plenty of anecdotal reports of people being served conspiracy theories or things from extremist users on Twitter. They've also taken some recent steps to label misleading information in tweets, but these tools are also new and imperfect. So definitely still worth it to be cautious on Twitter. So there's a lot of debate out there about, what the role of these platforms should be, how much control government should take in this whole issue, and that's an entirely separate presentation. But I think in the meantime, there are a couple of things that we can do as consumers to just be more careful. And a lot of them echoes Ken's advice from grandma. But the first is research before you repost or retweet. I've had friends, even that I agreed with, share something on Facebook and say, if this is true, blah, 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 which just makes me crazy, because don't put the onus don't put the onus on your friends to research something. You should be doing this research before you share it. And then check to see whether someone paid for you to see that content. On all of these platforms, there's sponsored tags. Facebook will use suggested for you. There's wording that indicates your friend liked this, so you might like it too. All of that means that somebody paid for you to see that content, and you really have to think pretty hard about who that was. Be suspicious of anonymous users. If they don't have a profile picture or a website that you can go to, and they're claiming to be an expert on something, you just really have to look at whether that person is who they say they are. You can also tell pretty often if people have Twitter activity that doesn't seem right, or Facebook activity, like they just started their profile one day ago and they have 300 posts already. That's probably not a real person. It could be a bot. It could be someone who paid to set up this page. So that's something to be careful of. Seek out experts on topics. Academic researchers, journalists. You may be seeing biased information, but less disinformation. And, that's a whole conversation that we could have too, the difference between bias and disinformation. But I think, intent goes into a lot of this. Is someone trying to deceive people for some sort of gain? And then I think this is especially good. We've got a month left to the election. So I think this is powerful too, is get off social media, take a break, close the app, go independently search out information, find news outlets that you trust and visit their websites, talk to people in person, but don't, I've already seen friends with COVID or with politics that just get stuck in this social media sphere where they can't really, they just get so far dug in that you get worried for them. So,
right.
So make sure to take a break. If you see people, who seem to be falling down that spiral, help them take a break too. And then lastly, I just wanted to, I said doing your research was important. And I just wanted to list a couple of fact-checking resources that I use pretty frequently. Snopes has been a good one for years and years. They really look at internet hoaxes. So they'll look at a lot of those things that pop up in Facebook and you're like, that can't possibly be real. And they will, they look at photos, they look at memes, they look at a lot of different things that can really be helpful. PolitiFact and PunditFact are two, they're out of a newspaper, and I'm blanking on which newspaper right now. Sandra probably knows.
Tampa.
Yeah, and have won a ton of awards. They fact check statements by politicians and pundits to look and, they rate things from true to pants on fire. So really helpful. Factcheck.org is another good one. And then NewsGuard is this browser plugin that they went to a paid model not too long ago, but they're really interesting because it's a browser plugin that grades the site that you're on on a certain number of factors. So you can tell whether this is a blogger that's just made things up completely, or whether this is someone who is an actual journalist who did research and interviewed people and things like that. So that's my spiel for today. And again, I just want to reiterate, I'm not telling everyone to quit social media or anything like that. I just personally believe that being a good citizen means using these resources responsibly and just really thinking about what we need to do and how we need to use them to their best effect.
Thank you, Emily. And before we move on to Sandra, I just want to say that following this presentation today, I am planning to take a month-long personal social media hiatus myself. I'm serious. And I wouldn't be a good librarian if I didn't recommend a book to you. The book that led me to this decision is called Digital Minimalism, and it's by Cal Newport, and it advocates for just what Emily said, which is a smart approach to social media where you put yourself and not those companies in control of what you see and what you read. So with that, I will get off my soapbox and turn it over to Sandra. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This has been really great. I really enjoyed your presentations, Emily and Kent. As a first draft news fellow this year, I spend a lot of time looking for, well, I don't have to go very far, looking at disinformation around coronavirus, around vaccines, around the elections. And, we sort of classify things as 7 different types of things. And it's worthwhile to think about what these sorts of things are, especially if you're going to talk to your friends or family members and try to gently say, wow, where did you find that? Satire or parody, a lot of people, myself included, sometimes get fooled by that. It's, as Emily said and Kent said, you've got to check it out. A lot of times this misinformation has a grain of truth in it, but there are false connections being made, or it's misleading content. There are sometimes when things are just out and out false content. There are other times when people have created imposter content or are trying to mimic news organizations. I have a friend who had somebody create a Twitter account to try to look like hers, and it took her like a month to get Twitter to get rid of it.
Wow.
There's manipulated content out there where people have taken photos and messed with them. And I think, totally whole cloth fabricated content is a little bit more rare. Most of this stuff has a bit of truth. So, today has been a day. And so one of the people I had in one of my TweetDeck columns is Dr. Kelly Victory. She's from Steamboat Springs. And I'm just going to share with you some examples that I've seen out there that I think you should be aware of. But, she has been a big promoter of hydroxychloroquine and zinc as a cure. She has a ton of followers. She's out there talking about hydroxy and other things on Twitter today, and she's getting a lot of attention for it. like I said, anyone can fall for this. This looked legit to me. This city and county to celebrate all the brave men and women who share coronavirus hoaxes. We're inviting the Heen family to do the next flyover in Colorado. I did share this. I acknowledge that, okay, I figured that out, but it is a parody site, but it was a pretty good one. Okay. You know, I look at a lot of groups and people use these pictures. This was shared nationally by various conservative groups about the Tulsa, Oklahoma rally back in February or whenever it was. This is not Tulsa. This is Chicago. You know, a reverse image search. I've got a handout that a Google Doc that you can take a view on, make a copy, whatever, look through. It's got a ton of resources, including how to do a reverse image search. But everybody was like, this is what Tulsa is like today. No, it's not. You know, there's some misleading content out there. It's not always the intent to mislead people, but, you know, this is true. During the primaries, elections, keep in mind, elections are all local. So even your election in Boulder County is going to be different than mine in Denver or somebody's in Delta County. This is from a Delta County group where the guy was saying these are, you know, these different colored envelopes. They're trying to scam us and they're giving them, you know, they're taking away our anonymity. And every county has different ways. And some do color code ballots so they can process them in different ways. Because certain voters have got to have an ID, certain people, they might, I mean, there are a variety of different reasons for this. You know, there are places out there that are posing as news sites, and this is one of them. During the primary election, this was one of a couple of news sites that were really going after Republican candidates in Weld County. You know, like Tanya Van Bieber, the Democratic in Republican clothing. Not true. There's some truth in, well, I don't think two Democratic dark money groups were posing as Republicans. There was one group that spent a lot of money supporting a certain slate of candidates that if you go down the rabbit hole, it is funded by Catherine Murdoch, who's the daughter-in-law of Rupert Murdoch, and she does fund a lot of Democratic causes. She and her husband, James, no longer are with any of these Fox properties. They're not on that side. You know, sometimes people do report things that are just plain wrong. CBS 4 did a story last week at 5 that wasn't great. And I think this was in August. A Grand Junction TV station got a report from a viewer and some photos that this mail sorting machine had been thrown out at the Postal Service. They said in their original story that the Postal Service didn't respond. The story took off, and I saw like a state lawmaker share this on Twitter the next day, and I clicked through to the story. Click through to the story and look at it, please. Because it had been updated, though the headline hadn't necessarily changed, and it was a used sorting machine that had come from another city to them, and they could not repair it. So they did throw it out because it could not be used. But it got everywhere. It was shared on MSN.com, as has the Channel 4 story about the Secretary of State trying to get dead people to vote from last Friday. And once it's out there, it just takes off, and it's bad news. We need to do a better job. You know, one of the things you need to look out for are some things we call them keyword squatting, when they try to take a keyword that's popular that has might grab at you emotionally. And there are these groups out there about Save Our Children and Save the Children. They've held a few not well-attended marches in Denver and other places. There are a lot of people in some of these Facebook groups. And I think this is a place that Facebook has done a crappy job of you know, allowing people to create these groups that then you end up, this is part, it has its origins in the QAnon conspiracy groups. And this is an actual post that was on the Denver group's page. And you see people on there defending Q, even though they say their effort is to stop child trafficking, but they share a lot of wrong information on there. You know, I mean, and it isn't just social media that you see these things in. I actually have a site called Follow the Message. And I think that there's a link to that on my little handout thing. But these are a couple of different mailers that people have gotten. And, you know, one is in a state Senate district, Suzanne Sterrett, casting a shadow on our community, but it's totally misinterpreted what happened with this journalist who was spreading incorrect information about the Secretary of State when she worked there. This other mailer is going out from the Republican Party. The mailer against Suzanne is from a Democratic super PAC. She's running for state Senate and they're really opposing her. This mailer against John Hickenlooper in the U.S. Senate contest, hey, there's a debate on tonight at 7. This is from the Republican Party, and it says he's set free all of these people. You know, it's got 5 people, at least 3 of them, maybe 4 are people of color. 3 of them are actually, if you were to look it up, I have, 3 of them are still in state custody. And so this is, you know, people are trying to mislead you. My site, and I would love to get your mailers because I love doing this. I've got a couple in the queue that I need to get on. But, you know, I check these things out. I let you know who's paying for these things and who's the money behind them, because it's often not the candidates. So there's my email. There's my little spiel. I'm pretty brief. But, you know, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Sandra. And I just wanted to remind everybody out there who's in our live audience to please post your questions, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. I've been writing old school my questions down as our panelists spoke. I had some prepared, but of course their presentations brought more to the fore for me. But we would love to hear from you too. We're going to move now to the formal Q&A section where I am going to take our prepared questions and ask them. But please post yours, and you will be your questions will be asked right afterwards. And we definitely want to hear from our audience. So I think all 3 of you have given us a lot of food for thought. And so I want to start with some of these questions that I was writing down during the presentation. Sandra, as a journalist, one of the things I notice about disinformation is that it's much harder to correct it than it is to put it out there in the first place. You'll see a front page story maybe riddled with errors, and then the correction will run inside in tiny type, or if it's on social media, it'll be a Facebook post or tweet no one sees. And so I do think some outlets do try to correct some of these things, but they do a poor job at it. Is there a way they could be better about that in this fraught environment?
It's a really difficult thing to do, and we try our best not to make errors. You know, the Channel 4 story last weekend came out at 5 on Friday, and it wasn't taken down till midday on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And by then it had been picked up by Breitbart and other conservative outlets. And I think, you know, that's one of the things we struggle with. Some people would say, like, on the page where the story was, explain that it was wrong, so that when people try to click through to that link is still out there, explain it was wrong and explain why. Mm-hmm. And keep using social media to follow up, you know, retweet some of those things. I mean, you know, one of the things that it's important to do too is not to repeat the error, not to repeat the misinformation, but to correct it by presenting the correct information.
Right. I would agree with that. And I can see that that's a thorny problem that's not easy to solve. And then moving back to Emily's presentation, and maybe all 3 of you might have something to say about this. Everything that all of you have said has pointed to a philosophical issue with this, which is that moderates do not have much of a voice in this environment, because not only are the algorithms pushing people to say, Hitler videos, if you are watching cat videos, like you said, Emily. But our own friends and family are forwarding things that make us feel like we aren't doing enough as if we are moderate or have moderate beliefs on any of these issues, and push us in one direction or another when maybe our inclination wouldn't really be to go that way if we had control of this ourselves. Do any of you have any thoughts on that, on the difficulty of being a moderate in the political environment of 2020 leading up to this election?
Well, one of the things I'd say is it used to be for media folks, the bleeds that leads was the headline grabber. If there was something about murders or accidents or fires or things of that nature, those were the big headlines, the big news story. Now it seems to be if it divides, it flies. Anything that provides feeds our natural division, or not natural, feeds our divisions as in a political sense, kind of ends up being the hot media story of the day. So one of the things I think is helpful for people to do is to look at stories and say, what would someone that disagrees with me say about this? Try to get in their heads a little bit and they recognize they're good folks.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Kent.
Yeah, I think that's where taking a break from social media can come in handy too, is once you start talking to people, or once you start, looking up topics on your own, and reading news sources, you get a lot more of that moderate feeling than you do on social media. I mean, there's been times where I've found myself getting really emotionally invested in something that's going on Facebook. And so I'll go to, the main page of the New York Times or something like that to sort of recalibrate, like, what is actually important in the world, and click over to the global tab and see what else is happening outside of the United States. It kind of takes a purposeful intention to reorient yourself in the world, and everybody's not as extreme as you may think they are from certain discourses that you're seeing.
Right. It's sort of like, there are people out there who have real problems. My mom always said, just go get interested in other people and you'll find your whole point of view changes. It's like grandma, right, Kent?
Yeah, grandma knows.
So
the other thing I'd say is there's a website out there called Media Bias Chart. Now it takes all the kinds of media and puts it on a bell curve, and that's really pretty useful. What tends to sit at the top of it is the AP sources. AP tends to be a pretty reliable and decent news source. They work really hard to fix things that they've made mistakes with too.
Okay. Okay. What personal experiences could affect whether an audience gravitates toward fake news? I mean, yes, there are algorithms pushing us in these directions, and there are family members and friends who want to push us in certain directions, but do any of these folks doing this have anything in common when we aren't talking about the Russians or the algorithms? What might make somebody more prone to believing this stuff and sharing it than somebody else? Or are we all prone to it and some of us don't want to admit it?
I think people have different viewpoints. And one of the things when you're talking, and they have strongly held views about certain things, like, say, immunizations. That is a very touchy topic here in Colorado. Mm-hmm. And some of that information has some grains of truth, but others do not. But people, they want to see things, as Ken said, that support their own viewpoints. Mm-hmm. And I think it's difficult, when people are sharing these things on social, it's good to go out there and use some of those sites that Emily mentioned and that I have listed on my little tip sheet, and check it out yourself. Mm-hmm. And look for other news information about this topic, and maybe have a private conversation with that person about, hey, I'm curious about, where did you get that information? And can you show me the original source? And, is not say, you want to not demean people, but to sort of share with them and then say, well, I found this. And, you know, a lot of people, they really are really invested in this and believe in the things that they do. And that's been the way for a while. I mean, there are a lot of people who didn't believe that the moon landing happened in the 60s, right?
Right.
And Pen America has a great resource on talking with people in your circles about this sort of thing. And I mean, you know, one tip is that eventually maybe the conversation has got to end.
Right.
To talk about it.
Do you think that it helps to make these conversations one-on-one rather than even having a one-third other person there?
I think it's better to have one-on-one, probably. And it's better not to call them out in the post that they made.
Yes.
Though I guess I've gently done that with some friends before. But, you know, I think it's better to try it one-on-one, maybe in an email or through Messenger or verbally, but just to say, you know, really casually, hey, I'm wondering about that link. Could you share more about this? And then, you know, say, well, gee, I read this over here. And, you know, news outlets get some things wrong. So you want to make sure that what you're sharing is the correct info. And I think it's good to, you know, Emily was talking about it, and Trisha, you're going to go on your social diet, but I think it's fine for real people to go on a media diet and say, I am going to look at these 3 sources at the top of the day and maybe in the late afternoon, not the end of the day. And just say, these are things that I'm going to like look into. These are the topics I'm interested in. You know, there are a ton of people out there doing their voter guides right now that are going to be really useful resources. I've been doing a Q&A about voting and registration and ballots and things like that, that I know a lot of media outlets have used on their digital sites. So I think, you know, seeking that sort of information out that's legit.
Right.
Anyway,
That leads me to another question I had, and hopefully this isn't too personal, but if each of you could name your favorite news site and why you like it, that might be very helpful for some of our viewers.
Now you're asking me to pick my favorite child.
You can tell us that too.
Yeah, that'd work. One of the things I want to talk about before I do that is what really helps with people is tell them how they're right before you tell them they're wrong. With anti-vaxxers, one of the things is to say, yeah, you're right to be concerned about these medical things. These are really concerning issues. It's really important to check out the science behind it and things of that nature. And that way you validate what they're concerned with before you tell them, oh, here's the other side of it. And that way you get them on your side a little bit first. It tends to open up their minds more. I like the Colorado Sun. I think it's doing a good job. They've taken over from the, and I like my local newspaper, the Times Call, and did some good work too, I think.
Yeah, I agree about the Times Call. I think there's so few local papers anymore, but when you do have one that's a decent paper, you should latch onto that and make that the first thing that you read every day, because you can make more of a difference locally than, you know, we hear a lot about the national election, and it is very important, but what happens in your own town is important too, and it affects you more directly.
There's a couple of local websites that sprung up to pay more attention to local news as well. It's really helpful.
Emily, what about you? What do you like to look at on a daily basis, or if it's not daily, how often do you? Because you're an expert, so share your wisdom.
No, I mean, I agree. The Colorado Sun, I think, is a great new outlet that's doing really good work, and it's you know, people who really believe strongly in the power of local news, and I would encourage everyone to become a member of their website. The Denver Post and Longmont Times Call and everything. These are really important news outlets because you know, knowing what's going on in your community and what's affecting your neighbors is really important. I think at a national level, the New York Times is still kind of the, you know, that that's the big one. They've still got people doing fact checking, which is pretty rare these days, and reporters just doing fantastic work and really trying hard to keep people informed. There's a website called Vox that definitely has more of a leftist spin, but they do these really great explainers about certain topics. So they really break it down really simply into like, here are the bullet points about this topic that you need to know. And I go there a lot because I'll wake up in the middle of a news cycle or an outrage cycle and I'm like, wait a minute, what did I miss?
Right.
Because I'm, I don't look at it 24/7. So those are really great for, just giving you kind of the basics of what you're looking at. And then you can move on and read more stuff, but good to kind of ground yourself. I think those are some of the ones that I'm kind of scrolling through my Twitter feed even now and looking at who I follow. But those are
Yeah,
really
right.
Also, like
ProPublica is a fantastic, really doing in-depth journalism on really important topics, and some of it is very eat your vegetables, but it's really, really good journalism.
KUNC, KCFR is doing great work with public radio stuff on Colorado news anyway. Their local news is a little sketchy, but not sketchy, but a little bare.
Yeah, Colorado Public Radio is fantastic. NPR.
Yeah, I am old, so I get the old school print New York Times every day, but I also listen to either Colorado Public Radio or KUNC most of the day as well, because I'm in the news. I'm a news junkie. And I'm getting Mitchell Byers, the morning newsletter from the Daily Camera still, and following Shay Castle on the Boulder Beat on council nights, even though I no longer live in Boulder. And looking at Denverite and the Denver Post every day and following what those kids are doing out there. There's some really there are some great young reporters really busting their behinds out there covering all these things that are going on, and you can get so many great perspectives. So
for election news, the League of Women Voters is great stuff.
Yes.
And I think the Boulder Weekly and Westward also have election guides that are just terrific work.
This is a poor question for a librarian to ask, but I'm so used to the before times where we would get the League of Women Voters hard copy leaflets, and obviously we're not doing that right now. Is that information available online? Yes. Okay.
I think the league has it. I know that the Post is going to have some really comprehensive things. The Colorado Sun, at some point, the Colorado News Collaborative is going to have some really good, like a clickable map and a list of stories that all sorts of organizations throughout the state have done. So you can find those stories that relate to like your county.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the formal Q&A there. And I do see we have a few questions in the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over to Catherine. Thank you so much for the insights you've already provided. And let's see what our audience wants to know.
Sure. Thanks, Terja. You all have done a great job of answering some of our questions already. We got from Melinda a question about recommended least biased news sources. So thank you for going over your favorites there. And Gina writes to us asking, who do you all think are the most vulnerable to fake news? The New York Times ran an article that older people are more vulnerable. Do you think that is because they are not digital natives? And Gina's worrying about the youngest among us who are growing up in this digital age.
I think oh, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I was just going to say, I've seen in my social circles, people of all ages susceptible to fake news. I think for
Right.
I think for older people, it could be an issue of just this is an entirely new way to navigate the world and navigate news. So, I could definitely see the New York Times, reporting being accurate. And then I think the youngest people, have grown up with this just being such a part of their lives that they kind of just accept that social media is this neutral good that exists in all our lives, but it's not, which is kind of why I try to bring up, governance and ownership as issues that we need to be aware of on both sides.
There actually has been a pretty significant study that indicates that people my age, in our 60s, are the older folks, are the people, the boomers are the people who are most susceptible to this. And I think it is a combination of being, younger people having that digital native thing. I think that there's a little bit of thrown in, set in one's ways, looking for validation, perhaps watching too much of one network or another. And it is more of a problem for my generation. And when I talk to the younger people, my millennial and Gen Z friends, and even, kids that I know, I mean, a lot of them are not on social that much. They're not. And they're not in the realms of information unless, they did all buy those tickets to that Tulsa rally though on.
You can do that, yes.
I do think one of the problems we should watch out for are creating young cynics who think they can't trust anything, and that becomes as much a problem as anything else. That it's kind of what the disinformation campaign is all about: is get people not to trust each other, not to trust news sources, and to question everything. The questioning things is not bad, but believing it's all lies and disinformation is really dangerous for us as a society. We have to be able to trust each other in some way.
That's a really good point, Ken. You want to tread a line between cynicism and over idealism. Again, I advocating for the moderate point of view here, I guess.
I think skepticism is a fine line to walk in the middle.
It is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And coming to us from Morgan is a question. In a world where media overload is a very real thing, but there are also unprecedented events happening all the time, how do we know when to stop reading the news?
That's another tightrope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to say if you're watching this, you're doing too much.
No, this is what you should be watching.
Wrong idea.
I think 24 hours a day is too much. I think constantly being plugged in, Sandra was talking about the fact that stories are being updated and media is changing. If you're checking in a couple of times a day, you are going to see when that's corrected maybe, and you're not watching what's going on in between. So there's when the news story drops, and then there's all these people commenting on it, and then the correction gets made, and then more people are, so I think, if you're just checking in a couple of times throughout the day, you may be in a safer spot than constantly watching it. I don't know. That's kind of my take on it.
Yep, I agree.
I like subscribing to people's newsletters. Like I actually subscribe to the Washington Post as well digitally, but I like just seeing their headlines in the morning in a newsletter format. I like getting Axios's newsletter in the morning. And like I said, the Daily Camera. Those are all really useful things. I get the Denver Post, The Spot every week. So, that's one way to sort of keep up. I mean, I don't know that you necessarily want to know every time something breaks. So I think, if I didn't have to look at this all the time, I'd probably just say, okay, every 2 hours, I'm going to look at Twitter or something.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, there was a half hour of news at night and a half hour of local news at night. And with the local newspaper in the morning, maybe take a half an hour there. I feel like people are pretty well informed with an hour and a half of news a day. That's funny.
Yeah, I do think there's something to feeling pressured if you're somebody who wants to be well informed. Often friends and colleagues will say to me, did you hear and I'll think, no, I haven't checked the news. I haven't looked at the news in the last 2 hours, and now I'm embarrassed that I don't know this yet, you know? And I don't, does that happen to you too, Tertia?
Yeah, there's a FOMO, fear of missing out to it.
Yeah, about the news too.
About the news too. You want to be perceived as an intelligent, informed person, but it can drive you crazy. Getting back to the Newport book again, his advice is to turn off the notifications for these things on your phone. So yes, I have the New York Times app on my phone, but I've turned the notifications off. So now if I want to look at it, I make the deliberate choice to go there. I'm not being sent headlines that might make me want to tap, clickbait. Not that the New York Times isn't super guilty of clickbait, but they want you to read their stuff too. So you get these notices, and no matter what you're doing, you could be having a deep conversation with your 13-year-old who never talks to you, and suddenly you feel like, oh, I need to go look at my phone. It's all about like you being in charge of it and not letting them be in charge of it, even if you like them as a source. Right? That's my take on it.
Yep.
So does that do it for our chat questions for the moment?
Yeah, at the moment. I actually had a question about Emily. During your presentation, you started to touch on the difference between bias and disinformation, and said, "Well, that's a whole other conversation." But I'm curious, maybe if we could have a minute of that conversation, and you could say a little bit more for our viewers about the distinction between those.
Oh gosh. Let me organize my thoughts for a second. So I was a journalism major in college. I worked for the Daily Times Call for a while before, realizing that I needed to maybe find a more stable career. And there was always this thing that they were trying to teach us, which is true objectivity. And true objectivity is not possible. Even if your reporting is completely unbiased, what you cover, what you choose to cover, is biased in itself. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's why the variety of news sources is important, and local coverage is important, and all of these things. But disinformation just feels different in that, again, like there's someone's trying to mislead you, and there's some real interesting power dynamics at play in who's driving these conversations and trying to control the narrative. So, I mean, that's kind of where my presentation on that would start. But
mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of it has to do with the intention then behind.
And I mean, Sandra looks at disinformation all the time, so she probably has a better sense of what that really is and what it means.
I don't know that I do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some things I've read have talked about the distinction between misinformation, where somebody just gets it wrong, and disinformation, where they're really trying to put one over on you.
When your old auntie shares somebody else's disinformation, mm-hmm. that misinformation, they didn't realize that it's wrong. Or when I share the parody thing about Balloon Boy, and people make these mistakes, and maybe they wouldn't make them. So maybe you can give them a gentle nudge on the DM, and let them know about that stuff. I mean, it's really difficult because there's so much stuff coming at you all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to put in a plug for my tip sheet, which is at bit.ly/FISH_BPL, because I've got a bunch of links and resources there, and it could be useful.
Thank you so much for compiling that for us too.
It's a running tab.
Yeah, keep adding to it. Definitely.
Yeah, it's good for people to walk away with some practical actions they can take here.
That makes all of us feel better, just being able to do your own small part to do that. So do any of the panelists, I think we can wrap it up now, but I would like to, before we end the program, do any of the three of you have any parting remarks you'd like to leave our viewers with?
You know, I would like us to stop using the term fake news.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
You know, I've been a journalist for a really, really long time, and this is a term that in the political environment has become weaponized to undermine the credibility of people with whom you disagree, and of the media when they don't report favorably about you. And so that's a problem. And you know, misinformation and disinformation is also spread widely in other arenas. You know, people on WhatsApp are sharing with family and friends memes and things like that that are going viral that we don't even know about because we're not in those groups. And so, you know, I'd like to sort of stop the use of that, but also be aware, you know, when something seems too good to be true, you've got to check it out because it probably is. Back to Balloon Boy.
I want to encourage everybody to be good citizens, just to do the work. It matters, and the more you can learn, the better off you're going to be. And vote on purpose, vote with purpose.
But only vote once. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think that would be my final pre-election thing as well, is please vote. You know, I got my blue book in the mail the other day. I'm going to be reading that and sitting down with my ballot pretty soon. But, you know, I just think it's so important that's right now, that's the way we make our voices heard. And I think some people think, oh, I'm making my voice heard on social media, but if that's just your friends and followers, that's not the impact that we want to have in the world. And voting right now is that's the impact we can have. So please do, all the way down the ballot.
It matters.
Yep. Don't leave anything blank. Well, thank you three so much. This has been informative, and it's also been fun, and it eases my mind to know that there are people out there thinking about these things and wanting the best for all of us and for our country. Really, it's really important. So I'd like to also thank Catherine and Adam and the Boulder Library Foundation once again, and all of you who've tuned in to watch, whether you're a live audience or you're viewing this in the future. You can still comment, so please do. We'll see that. And I hope this helps you feel better about our democracy, your social feeds, your friends and family, even the ones that you might disagree with. Finally, given that, please feel free to continue to direct people to this event. And it is recorded. It will be here indefinitely. And tune into some of our other programs. Come in and visit us at the library. And everybody stay safe. And I'll end with the same thing Emily said. Go vote. Have a great evening. And thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for the library.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.